Hi, everyone. David Aragona and Mike Beer here, taking a look back at the 2025 Kentucky Derby. 19 horses went to post, and the best of the 3-year-olds that competed last Saturday was Sovereignty. Godolphin finally gets their Kentucky Derby victory. Bill Mott officially gets the Kentucky Derby as soon as they cross the wire. This was his second Kentucky Derby, technically, with Country House getting promoted via disqualification, but I'm sure this one was more satisfying for Bill Mott and his go-to jockey, Junior Alvarado, he's had so much loyalty to over the years, gets his first Kentucky Derby victory. Mike, I didn't make any money on this race personally, but as a fan of the game, I found this to be a pretty satisfying Kentucky Derby result.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Doesn't I don't think it, the wagering stuff aside. I mean, it's just sometimes it's just really nice when a race actually goes to form, even with 19 horses in there. And I feel like all along, David, even leading up to this Derby when we did the preview for it, kind of felt like journalism and sovereignty were sort of the top two leading lights in this division leading up to the race. And then everybody was going to fill in behind them. And it's exactly how the race played out on the track.
Yeah, you can see in some of these photos we're taking a look at from Churchill Downs on Saturday. The winner was covered in mud, as were most of the competitors in the Kentucky Derby, but didn't feel like the wet track really messed with the result too much, Mike. There were a couple trips that we'll get into as we go deeper into our discussion, recapping this race. But as far as the top three finishers go, Mike, they all got, I think, the trips that they were looking for, maybe brief moments of traffic at different points, but it feels like all three of them really showed up. And as you were alluding to, they seemed like they were some of the best horses coming into the race, and they proved it on the track.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would even throw in the fourth finisher there, getting the trip that he wanted in the race too, and he actually really ran. Yeah, just really good trips for both sovereignty and journalism. I mean, there's a little point at the start of the race where it felt like they both sort of like narrowly avoided real trouble at the start of this race, but they did avoid it. And after that, I thought the trips worked out perfectly for both of them.
And it is kind of interesting, Mike, with Godolphin finally getting their Kentucky Derby victory this way. We remember going back a couple decades or so, they were purchasing finished products as 2-year-olds, bringing them over to Dubai, trying to win the Derby that way for so long. It feels like in recent years, they've really revamped their approach. They're much more into the breeding game. Sovereignty, of course, is a Godolphin homebred, and they've had a lot of top runners, both in the Brad Cox and Bill Mott stables over recent years. So I'm sure it's satisfying for Godolphin to achieve it this way.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that 100%. This has been coming for a few years now too. I mean, they've just been really, really strong for the last, couple of years. You could see their younger horses getting better and better and better every year, and it's all coming to fruition for them now.
Let's take a look at the full DRF chart for this Kentucky Derby to see where everybody finished and their trips along the way, Mike. And when you take a look at this view, you can kind of see that this was a race that favored horses coming from a little further back in the pack. That's typical for the Kentucky Derby. They were really moving up front. It wasn't the biggest pace collapse that we've ever seen in the Kentucky Derby, but you definitely didn't want to be up duking it out towards the front end. Really, the only horse that hung around at the end that was doing that was Owen Almighty.
The pace was legitimate, to be sure. I feel like, and listen, I'm not going to sit here and suggest that the pace had nothing to do with this outcome, but the flip side of that is to look at this race, and we've already sort of laid it out, David. I mean, the best horses in the race. I put best in quotes because you don't ever want to just call horses the best in any kind of a race, but it's a logical result. The best horses were closers in this race, and they dominated the race.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. And Sovereignty, he did have a slight moment coming out of the starting gate where I know Junior Alvarado said that he clipped heels. It was a very minor clip as
Yeah.
Chunk of Gold crossed over in front of him. He quickly regained his stride. And, watching them come past the stands for the first time, Mike, I'm sure they couldn't have dreamed up a better scenario for this horse because he was sort of all alone. He didn't have anybody on his right or his left. He could just get into his stride towards the back of the pack in 16th early. And that's really a rare thing to happen in the Kentucky Derby when you feel like you have no traffic around you and you can sort of find your stride in the early portions of the race. And Mike, I also thought Umberto Rispoli did a pretty good job on journalism because things got pretty tight coming by the stands for the first time, and he was able to find those gaps for him to eventually work his way to the outside on the backstretch.
Notice the same thing about journalism. That run through the first time through the stretch and into the first turn thought was maybe a little dicey for this horse, but the one thing that I really appreciated about journalism in here too, David, because I think a lot of the talk coming into the race was, how is he going to deal with adversity? He's going to be, there's 18 other horses in here and he's been running in nothing but short fields. He really dealt with it. Like he had no problem in tight right at the start of this race, in tight all the way down to the first turn, and he was just bowling his way through it. He did not care. And then Rispoli did get him out into the clear through the stretch, and he got a good trip after that. Sovereignty, you could just tell right from the start. I mean, after that little like minor clip of the heels there, he was always in a perfect position here. And Alvarado, to his credit, I mean, obviously he didn't have to overcome any traffic trouble or anything, but he knew where he wanted to be. As soon as they got out of that first turn, he got this horse right off the inside and right behind Journalism and followed him around the track. And then he gunned him down in the stretch.
Yeah, he really was Journalism's shadow from about the half-mile pole home until he was able to pop outside of him and ultimately prove his superiority in the end. Mike, did you think that that brief moment of traffic for Baeza coming to the quarter pole might have made the difference between second and third for him? Because Pratt made a different decision than Rispoli and Alvarado. He tried to save a little bit of ground around that far turn and had to steady very briefly approaching the quarter pole, but he ultimately got out in the stretch.
Yeah, he did. It was hard for me to tell. I must have watched his trip 4 or 5 times in a row just to try to really see what happened on that final turn, because it's a lot of traffic and that camera's pretty far away. So I don't think I ever got a clear view of it, David, but you're right. I mean, the 1-2 finishers did get outside and get around him as they came into the stretch. And then this horse was running again at the end. I didn't know how much credit to really give him for that. I don't want to sit here and say he was second best and unlucky not to be second here, because I don't believe that. Still thought he ran really, really well in there. This horse, he's got a big future.
Mike, I think we do have to talk about the start of this race before we move on, because Citizen Bull definitely affected a few horses as he made that right-hand turn coming out of the gate. You do want to sort of make your own space when you're coming out of post one, and he did that and then some.
Yeah, I don't want to say that he did it on purpose, but it kind of seemed like he did it on purpose. And you don't like to see stuff like that. He really interfered with a bunch of horses there. And then I think also what that causes too, Dave, and you can really see this when you watch, and again, I think the narrative of this Derby, it's a cleanly run race. There were a couple of trips, but you can really see this after Citizen Bull does that at the start. If you watch the head on of this field running first time through the stretch of the first turn, there is a ton of traffic. There's a ton of horses knocking into each other. Everybody's angling over behind Citizen Bull to try to save ground. This was a very roughly run race into the first turn.
Yeah, I'd love to sort of get a graphic of the start to just point arrows in the directions that all the horses went, because they'd be going into each other. I mean, you could tell that Citizen Bull from post one definitely wanted to make that right-hand turn, and Brian Hernandez Jr., who was riding Burnham Square, clearly wanted to make a left-handed turn. That horse broke surprisingly well and was shockingly forward early in the race, and he got him over towards the inside, Mike. And I think if you're pointing to one horse that was not able to achieve his best result due to the trip, I'd probably point to that horse being Burnham Square, who really got shuffled back basically from the half-mile pole to the quarter pole.
I think that's pretty clear. I mean, he was the horse. He's the one horse, and he wound up finishing a very underrated 6th in this race too. He had the toughest trip in the race. Nothing really went right for this horse. And he was the only horse I could really point to, David, when I watched it back and said, you know what? Who was unlucky in this race? Burnham Square was unlucky.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It'd be interesting to see what he could have done if he maybe wasn't ridden so aggressively away from the gate and didn't find himself trying to follow Admire Daytona past the half-mile pole, who, of course, did fade to finish last in here. Well, Mike, let's take a look at the past performances of those top 3 from the Kentucky Derby. And it's encouraging to see 3 horses earn triple-digit Beyer speed figures in the Derby, as Sovereignty, Journalism, and Baeza all did. Obviously, the latter 2 of them had already gotten those triple-digit Beyers in their prep races out in California, but this was a big jump forward for Sovereignty. But I know fans of his can't be too surprised that he was able to make the step forward, because it did kind of feel like Bill Mott was cranking him up to produce this best effort third off the layoff.
Did seem like he was probably set to peak on the first Saturday in May. Doesn't always work out that way, even if the trainer plans it like that, but it certainly worked for Sovereignty. The trip that he pulled in this race had something to do with it as well, because he got a perfect one in here, and he is a horse who can be pace dependent. So listen, it was his day. Everything really worked out for him. He didn't encounter any trouble in the race. He got the right pace set up. He came running into it. He was a deserving winner here. The second and third place finishers both ran big, and they're really, really good horses going forward.
Yeah, it feels like we've got some talent in this 3-year-old crop. It was starting to feel that way through the prep races, and I think
Yeah.
we got confirmation of that in this Kentucky Derby. It helps that these horses were able to get clean trips in the Run for the Roses for the most part, but we really saw them show up and deliver on those trips that they got. Let's move on and take a look at the past performances of the 4th and 5th place finishers for this race, Mike, whose trips really could not have been any different to each other, with Final Gambit getting sort of caught in that traffic jam at the start and going right to the back of the pack, where he probably would have been anyway. But Owen Almighty, he was way more forward from an outside post position, hung around a lot longer than I think most people expected.
Yeah, I think he certainly did. He outran, I think, his expectations in this race. It didn't seem like this is really where his trainer wanted to go. The 1.25 miles you knew was going to be difficult for him. He got that 3 wide tracking trip. He fought his way to the lead. Save Burnham Square, who finished right behind him with a lot of trouble. I would be maybe a little down on everybody else who maybe finished. Owen Almighty, you can watch this replay, David, and I'm not taking anything away from him because he ran his very best in here. This horse was on his hands and knees the final 1/8 of a mile in here, and anybody that couldn't get by him in the stretch, it's a little bit of an indictment.
Yeah, I think he just showed really his heart in this
Yes.
performance, because he was coming under pressure around the far turn, and he was the one that was able to keep finding more to at least hang around until the
Yeah.
3/16 pole before caving in later than some other horses did. And Final Gambit, a horse who's really on the upswing. I mean, he's just been improving with every single start, showed that the switch to dirt was no problem for him in this Kentucky Derby. Just really tough to not only come from last place, but do so going around the entire 19 horse field. And he was running on pretty well at the end, but couldn't quite get there in this Kentucky Derby. Let's take a look at the payouts from the Derby for the top 3. Sovereignty paying nearly $18, going off just a tick under 8-1 to win this race, Mike. And the Derby win pool is often one of the most strangely bet pools in all of horse racing every year, because you've got a lot of casual players throwing their money into the ring. If you're looking at other pools, the exacta, the daily doubles, Sovereignty was the clear second choice in this race, but you did get some value on him in the win pool in this Derby.
I think you got big value on him in the win pool. I was shocked all day long, David, when he's sitting up there at 9-1 for most of the day. Went off going up just about 8-1 in this race. And to me, he should have been the clear second choice in the win pool, but they went in other directions, which it's not that unusual for the Derby.
Yeah, and when you look at exacta and trifecta payouts, you see that Sovereignty was bet like he was the second choice, but betting in the win pool for this Derby did give you a much bigger payout than you would have gotten betting into other pools in this race. Well, Mike, let's wrap up our discussion, just kind of looking ahead to the Preakness. We've talked about how it feels like there's some strength in this 3-year-old crop. I don't know if the strongest members are going to proceed on to Baltimore in a couple weeks' time. We were seeing some reporting from our colleague Dave Grenning this morning that the top 3 feels like journalism is the one that has the strongest chance to show up in the Preakness right now. Sovereignty feels like, from the quotes, like they're leaning against it, but they're leaving the door open. Baeza is a definite no. So it feels like in recent years, we're going to see a lot of new shooters in the Preakness.
Yeah, the Preakness always gets the hardest hit these days. Nobody really wants to run back in that race for whatever reason. Boy, I really hope they decide to go with Sovereignty and journalism. But Sovereignty, certainly, he should be there, man. He's got to show up and run in that race. It'll be interesting to see who else shows up, David. Hopefully, it's just we get a really good field outside. Listen. Hopefully, the 1-2 finishers show up, and then we get a good field outside of that. One more thing I do want to throw in there, though. Final Gambit. He ran really well in here. I know they're going to press on to dirt. I'm kind of disappointed he ran as well as he did here, David. I want to see this horse on grass the rest of the year.
You know, I've come around. I thought he was a grass horse, and watching the way he worked over this Churchill surface and the way he ran, I have more optimism that he's going to be okay on dirt moving forward. We'll see. He's never been on a fast dirt track, but I imagine a lot of these horses are going to hook up in 5 weeks' time in that Belmont Stakes, because it being 1.25 miles at Saratoga, I'm sure that's an appealing option to a lot of these horses that competed in the Kentucky Derby. We'll see where all of these horses land, whether it be the Preakness, the Belmont Stakes. We'll have a lot more coverage of the rest of the Triple Crown on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel in the coming weeks.